Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, can you take your seat, please? We're now going to start with session 3, action on disaster risk reduction. Please come in, take your seat. So this next session is going to be facilitated by Yoshi Chihara. Chihara-san is the GEO Principal of Japan, as well as the Deputy Director General of Research and the Development Bureau at the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, which we call MEXT, M-E-X-T. So I will hand over now to Chihara-san.
Thank you very much, Stephen-san. Yes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this room, and welcome for today's session 3, Action on Disaster Risk Reduction. Sometimes I will call DRR. So I'm Yoshi Chihara, the Principal of Japan. I'm the facilitator of today's session 3. Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to welcome you. It is also an honor for me to facilitate this session, as Japan hosts the second and the third UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, which respectively adopted the Hyogo Framework and the Sendai Framework. First, I would like to introduce the two wonderful panelists here on the stage. Ms. Lisa Robinson-san. She is the head of advisory at BBC Media Action. Her team engaged in advising on how media and communication can improve people's lives, supporting staff and partners to deliver effective initiatives globally, and reaching over 100 million people a year. Most of her work over the past 15 years has focused on disaster risk reduction, resilience, and humanitarian response. She is also an adjunct professor for the University of Southern California's Annenberg School for Communication. Lisa-san will be making the presentation right after this introduction. Ms. Tiziana Bonapace-san here. She is the Director of Information and Communication Technology and Disaster Risk Reduction Division of United Nations Economic and Social Communication for Asia and the Pacific, UNSCAP. She is an international development economist and has led the preparation of studies, research, and analytical papers throughout her UN career. She has participated as a panelist in many meetings of senior government officials and business leaders. Since 2016, she leads ESCAP's ICT and Disaster Risk Reduction Program, which seeks to build resilience to disasters through improved connectivity and technological innovation. Tiziana-san will make her intervention from the perspective of a participating organization at the end of the session. In order to get started, I would like to introduce you the purpose of this session and how our discussion will be organized. Our goal today is for principals to provide guidance on actions for GEO to accelerate its effort to address disaster risk reduction, including supporting countries in their implementation of the Sendai Framework or DRR. We will have 45 minutes of discussion session to consider this theme. Based on the result, we are going to adopt the session outcomes and recommendations at the end. In order to trigger our discussion, the GEO Secretariat, James and Stephen-san, has provided us the discussion paper. It raises 3 questions for stimulating our discussion, as shown on the screen, not screen. How should GEO support the recommendations within the UNDRR Global Assessment Report for nations to invest in Earth observations and to leverage the move toward open data, collaborative science and cloud computing, how best to integrate GEO into disaster risk management process, building on and responding to the opportunities and benefit to use open and accessible Earth observations for reduction of disaster risk. Third one is what can GEO do to make more of an impact in risk reduction, and how can we achieve it? Yes, question is here on the screen. In addition, the discussion paper suggests the challenges and opportunities that GEO can potentially address. These questions and opportunities are a starting point to inspire our discussion. I would like to invite you to actively share your ideas to address these questions and even further beyond these questions. I especially would like to encourage you to discuss concrete actions that GEO can take in the future. I'm looking forward to having an active and concrete discussion. Now, I would like to invite Lisa-san to make the presentation. Lisa-san, please.
On? Yes, I think they're working now. The first slide, good. I'll just clarify for you, as Yoshi Chihara said, I work for the BBC. I work for a division of the BBC called Media Action, and that is an NGO, an international development agency, under the BBC. That means I am not a journalist, and some of you might be disappointed, some of you might be relieved, but I think you'll understand a bit more about our work after this presentation. Let me start by saying that all of you, as individuals and also as the GEO community, are doing absolutely fascinating work. I'm really impressed with the data that you're generating, that you're sharing, all with the intention of improving people's lives. One thing occurs to me is that there seems to be a continual question around where this data goes and perhaps why there isn't more action taken as a result of the data out there. So I understand this session is about how GEO can accelerate its impact on disaster risk reduction. And what I'm going to spend the next few minutes on is thinking about the role of communication in reducing disaster risk. And that might be one of the things that you consider over the course of this session. What I say will be focused on communicating with the general public, because that's what the BBC does, but in addition to that, most of what I say really can be applied to communication amongst peers and with policymakers as well. So, we're going to talk here about 5 mistakes that are typically made when communicating risk. Mistake number 1 is assuming that information leads to action. Now, clearly, knowledge, information is absolutely central to disaster risk reduction, and in fact it is, understanding risk is the first priority of the Sendai Framework. But it's about being realistic about what we expect that information to result in, and why it's so difficult, really, to prompt action as a result of this. Just so you know, I'm going to spend most of my time on this point number 1, so if you think I'm taking a long time, don't worry. The other 4 points will happen quite quickly. So, quick question here, just to make a point. How many of you know, how many of you have the information that exercise is good for you? Raise your hand, quick poll. Most of you are aware that exercise is good for you. Okay, hands down. Raise your hands if you exercise as much as you should. Oh, we need to go out for a walk this afternoon. Okay, point made is that information alone doesn't always prompt the kind of action that we need to see happen. On an individual level, a personal level, that might come down to questions around how much time you have, how much it might cost to fit exercise into your day, even your personal levels of motivation. In the UK, they found that women who didn't exercise very often felt very self-conscious about exercising. So there was a whole campaign to just role model very normal women exercising and feeling good about it. In the context of disaster risk reduction, there are lots of cases also where information doesn't lead to action. This is a picture of a model dugout, a shelter from forest fires just down the road here in the National Museum of Australia. And it made an interesting point. It said that in the 1930s, people said they didn't know, they didn't have the information about how to build these. So the government gave them the information, showed them how to build them, but people still didn't use them, didn't create them because they were too expensive to build and also to maintain. So practicalities get in the way as well. On top of that, a lot of psychology gets in the way as well, what are called cognitive biases. So there are lots of mental reasons for why people don't act on the information that they have. Maybe they only prepare for disasters that they've actually experienced themselves. Maybe they only do things that they see other people doing, or this very common one, maybe they only think that positive things will happen to them, not negative ones. So this cartoon here is about the optimism bias, where they're told they have a chance of dying, 1 in 2, won't happen to me. They might win the lottery, 1 in 80 million, could be my lucky day, and they're more likely to follow that. Now, so humans are complex, but on top of that, as if that weren't enough, the environments in which humans live are also terribly complex. So these aren't only individuals that we're talking about, it's the communities around them, the organizations, the political, economic, social systems that influence what happens in their lives. The built environments, the natural environments, all of this informs how people think, feel, and what they do. Social norms, everything, all of that influences how we see life and actually what we do. We know that disaster risk reduction requires a systemic approach to make a real impact. And when we talk about systems-based approaches, that tends to conjure up something really terribly complicated and almost difficult to convey. In this cartoon, a very entertaining 7-minute cartoon, the producers, who are the same people who produced the Muppets, managed to get across illegal logging, waste management, early warning systems, evacuation plans, and emergency management, all in a fantastic cartoon. In very simple language. So there really are ways of doing this. Mistake number 2 is to skimp on audience research. So I've just talked about how terribly complex people are and the environments in which they live. And if that's the case, then we really need to invest in understanding these things as deeply as possible. And this means understanding people beyond demographics. So understanding people's age, race, ethnicity, geography, income levels, all of that's helpful, but it's only part of the picture. What we need to understand are people's psychographics as well, their interests, their values, their priorities in life, their experiences with risk, their relationship, are they proactive, are they reactive, what's their relationship with fatalism, and in addition to that, it's understanding how they interact with their environment, the context around them, as well as how they communicate. Who do they speak with, when, about what, and most critically, who do they trust, and on which topics. BBC Media Action did a few years ago a really deep study on across Asia in 7 countries and 33,000 people across Asia in their lived experiences of climate change. And we really sought to understand some of these factors. What we found, just for example, was that in Pakistan, where people were suffering from flooding, they felt that they were being persecuted from God, or by God, and that was why it was happening, and therefore they didn't see any point in reducing disaster risk there. In Bangladesh, we found that people didn't want to be seen to be the first ones in their village making a change. They might stand out as a bit weird or odd amongst their community. And they also felt that the government or NGOs were needed to make any difference at all, and therefore they shouldn't take individual actions. And we try to understand these things to relate to people and identify with where they're coming from, not necessarily to change any of these deep-seated perceptions, but rather interact with them in a very productive way. In Costa Rica, there was an organization, World Animal Protection. Hello, you're waving. And what was interesting with this is that this organization did a study to try to understand why people were ignoring evacuation orders and going back into their houses. And it turned out they were going in to save their pets. They didn't want to leave dogs and cats behind. So what they decided to do, rather than just issue announcements to leave your pets behind, they flipped it around and they made a whole campaign about creating an emergency evacuation plan for your pet. Never mind the family, save the pet. And they did this because they knew that people would have a bit of fun and plan for their pets. They also knew that a family plan would follow quite quickly because you can't save your pet without your family. So by understanding the audience's priorities on their terms rather than yours, they were able to create a really clever and very effective campaign. Mistake number 3. Create a snazzy product with no solid plan for change. It's really easy for all of us, myself included, to get caught up in fantastically fun products. It could be an app, a map, a game, visual reality or virtual reality, gimmicks, art installations, all of that. And here's an art installation from the Biennale in Venice. There's a place for all of these, of course. It's key, really, to how we communicate. But if there isn't a solid plan for change that's linked to an understanding of your audience, you'll likely be left with a very nice, but possibly very expensive product that doesn't really affect or have the kind of impact that you're going for. Because the thing is that communication is not about a product, it's about a process. And this point was made really well in this report by Noah a few years ago, and that's something I think that's helpful to keep in mind for all of us. And when I say that I mean really that it's about having what some call two-way communication with audiences. And that's not just a tokenistic two-way, with an information button or a customer service link at the bottom of a web page. It's about really having conversation with people. So mistake number 4 is about avoiding conversation, and this happens a lot. The conversations that we want to see happen around disaster risk reduction happen at 2 levels. So on a personal level, in families and communities, we want people talking amongst themselves about risk reduction and what might change. If you can't see this, it's people falling over a cliff and the woman says, "Brad, we've got to talk." And often it's the point where it's just too late to really do anything about it. So on disaster risk reduction, we want people speaking all the time and early, way before we're reaching a critical situation. So at an individual level, it's people themselves, communities themselves that often have the best ideas. They're closest to the problem. Especially in risk reduction, there isn't always a correct answer or the right thing to do. So only through discussion can people come up with the solutions and be motivated to act. I think all of us will recognize that rarely do we just decide to do something without talking to our friends and family. Discussion is a precursor to action, so we need to build that into our plans. Beyond the individual level, we have the community level and a governance level of conversation. And we can't talk about information these days without talking about misinformation and disinformation. It's absolutely rife. It's always been around, but with social media, it's spreading and it's faster than ever before. In this particular image, there was a situation where there was some questionable scientific information about the level of earthquake risk in a community that was being shared and ultimately being used to displace communities so that high-rises, as you can see in the back, could be built. In the absence of communication, people didn't have enough information from enough trusted sources to make their own decisions about what was appropriate. And in these contexts, there is never an absence of information. If somebody doesn't provide information, somebody else will. So a challenge to all of us really is to think about how we can be more proactive in providing information, because if you as scientists or policymakers are not providing that information, other people will. They will step in with scientific evidence that perhaps you don't agree with, and they'll step in perhaps with other information from a governance angle that you don't agree with. So it's really important. It does take time, and it does take a lot of investment to communicate well and early on. But the consequence of not doing so can be very extreme in some cases. Right. This is a fantastic picture of a case where communication around risk governance was done really well. It's a long-running television program in Nepal called Saja Sawal, and they brought together very regular people from across the country, and you'll see it happened in very remote places as well as urban ones, where they put ordinary people face-to-face with technical experts and decision makers, and had those kinds of conversations that are very difficult for people in rural areas to have. And a lot of times, issues of disaster risk reduction were on the top of the agenda for people who were affected. So in these cases, issues around flooding, landslides, earthquake risk were all addressed at scale, not only at a community level, as is typical, but at the scale where you're reaching literally millions of people at a time. It's a way of democratizing information and helping everyone have the same conversation all at once. Last mistake here, number 5, be dull. It's quite easy to be dull when we're talking about disaster risk reduction, but it doesn't have to be that way. I would just remind us to step back for a minute and remember what it is that we're trying to do. We are trying to tell very busy people something that's quite complicated. Typically, risk reduction is about some complicated technical things that might or might not happen, and we're asking them to invest time or money to do something about it. So that's not an easy thing to talk about. Meanwhile, they're having the same call for attention from 100 other things in their lives. So they're told to pay attention to their health, connect with their family, go offline, do a digital cleanse, whatever. They're under a lot of pressure. So when we're talking about risk reduction, it's really important to make sure that it's relevant to people's lives. And what is relevant is typically family, money, or fun. These are things that people want to talk about, not necessarily insurance or plywood, but it's about finding ways of making insurance or the thickness of plywood relevant and fun. These examples here were all great examples of risk reduction or climate change in the mainstream media, and doing it in a way that really appealed to people. It doesn't need to be big and flashy. It can also be simple. This is a picture, but there was one program on the radio in Nepal, quite cheap and simple. It started after the earthquake, but it carried on for years afterwards. And the fact that it did carry on for years and had increasing numbers of audiences meant that they were very good at being engaging. They told stories, they gave examples of real people's lives. In this particular program, they also talked a lot about women retraining as masons, which hits the priority number 4 quite well. Now, what does it look like when all of this comes together in an example? So if we understand our audiences have a purpose, what does that look like? I'll play a video in just a second. But this is from a national television program in Bangladesh, where we did audience research. We understood that people didn't just need information, but they also needed that courage to not be the first one in their community to do something about it. And they needed a bit of motivation to pick up and go with it. So, video please.
এ পর্যন্ত আমরা ঘুরে বেরিয়েছি দেশের নানা প্রান্তে, কথা বলেছি সেসব এলাকার মানুষের সঙ্গে এবং একসাথে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনজনিত বিভিন্ন সমস্যার সমাধানের পথ খুঁজেছি।
এবার আমরা এসেছি দেশের দক্ষিণে, সমুদ্রের কোল ঘেঁষা বরগুনাতে।
আমরা এখন আছি বন্দরনগরী চট্টগ্রাম।
আমরা আছি বাংলাদেশের সর্বোত্তরে কুড়িগ্রামে। আমাদের এখন যে আয় রোজগারটা এই দিয়ে আমাদের সংসার চালাতে খুব কষ্ট হইতেছে। আমরা একবেলা খেতে পারি আর একবেলা খেতে পারি না।
শাক সবজিও লাগান যায় না, কিছু না, ধানের চাষও না।
আমরা কামলা কিসে না দিলে তো ভাত পাইনি, নদীর মধ্যে মাছ না ধরলে ভাত পাইনি।
এখন আমরা সর্বহারা, এখন যদি এই গর্বিটাটাও চলে যায় তো আমাদের থাকার আর কোথাও কোনো জায়গা নেই স্যার।
এই সাঁকড়ে দিয়ে আমরা খুবই কষ্ট করতাম, এখন আর এই কষ্ট হবে না। সাইক্লোন যদি আবার আসলেই ব্রিজটা আমাদের বেশ উপকারে আসবে।
এই যে ঘর তৈরির এই যে সিস্টেমটা আমাদের কাছে এখন বর্তমান সবচেয়ে নতুন সিস্টেম। এর আগে আমরা এই সিস্টেমটা পাইনি। এখন এইটা যদি আমাদের জন্য ঝড় সহনশীল হয় তাহলে এটা আমাদের জন্য অনেক ভালো।
এগুলো হলে নিজেরা খাতে পারবো বা একটু বেচতেও পারবো, জন্মজুরিটা খাটতেও তো সেটা ধরো আমার আর খাটাখাটনি করতে হবে না।
সবাই মিলে কাজ করলে একটু খুবই ভালো লাগে। আমার খারাপ লাগতেছে কারণ এই কাজটা আমরা এর আগে করতে পারতাম, তাহলে আমাদের আরো আগে পানির সমস্যাটা মিটে যেত।
আমাদের গল্প এখানেই শেষ নয়, যাত্রা কেবল শুরু।
Okay, so just to wrap up here, I would say that for those of you familiar with media, you might recognize that those impact figures are huge for what happens as a result of media. Nearly 50% reporting they would take action, nearly 80% reporting that they had learned something. We wouldn't have achieved those impact figures if we hadn't followed the things I mentioned above. But there's one other thing that was absolutely pivotal for that success, and it was working with people like you. In making these programs, it takes a joint effort amongst media, as well as technical experts, civil society organizations, government at all levels, to come together to create these conversations with audiences that really do make an impact. And I would just say we're all in the same boat, so ideally we'll work closer together in the future to reach the Sendai targets. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lisa-san. Very impressive stories. Thank you very much. I've already made 5 mistakes, but I understand the importance of the information, conversation, and communication. Thank you so much. So now I would like to invite the remarks and questions from the delegations. We have around 50 minutes or 45 minutes for the discussion. It can be about your ideas on the 3 questions on the screen, or beyond the 3 questions, and also the question to Lisa-san and Tiziana-san will be welcome. And you can also provide your comment by using a digital information tool. It's www.slido.com, and the code is #GEO Plenary. Okay. So now we'd like to start the discussion. Would you have any questions or remarks? So please, yes, stand up the nameplate or hand. Okay. Okay, European Commission, please.
Mr. Chair and delegates of the GEO Plenary, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'll try to address all those questions at once. Now, of course, open data, collaborative science, and open cloud computing are for us all parts of the open science priority, which was put forward by our Commissioner for Research and Innovation, Carlos Moedas, at the beginning of his mandate in 2014. But clearly we'll continue also in the future with the new Commission to really facilitate international collaboration in all areas of science, but also specifically in the area of disaster resilience. Now, we do so through both our research program, and an example is the Horizon 2020 eShape project, which has just kicked off with a grant of 15 million, And this will have a number of pilots, of which 4 will be in the area of disaster resilience. But we do so also through our operational programs. And here clearly we should highlight the Copernicus Emergency Management Service, SEMS, which has 2 components. One is on-demand mapping to provide rapid maps for emergency response and risk and recovery maps for prevention and planning. And then it has an early warning and monitoring component, which includes system for floods, droughts, and forest fires. Now, the question is, how can GEO contribute more? Well, clearly leveraging these facilities that are available, made available by all the GEO members, not just from us. And clearly here there are opportunities to integrate better SEMS and GEOs by making, for example, the activation of the Copernicus services accessible by the GEOS infrastructure, or by using GEOS assets derived from its flagships and initiative usable to facilitate rapid mapping or propose risk and recovery products. So I think that here we look forward to continue to work with the GEO Secretariat and the GEO community at large to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for European Commission. So next, Mexico. Where is Mexico?
Thank you. Mexico recognizes that the Sendai Framework for disaster risk reduction must make use of Earth observations. For this reason, Mexico values the participation of GEO in the preparation of the Global Assessment Report of UNDRR, as well as the Global Risk Assessment Framework. Similarly, Mexico supports the development of a work plan covering actions to report and monitor the Sendai Framework as recommended in the Global Assessment Report 2019. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. And the next is USA and China, Japan and Australia. So USA, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In support of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the United States actively participates in GEO efforts aimed at improving the full cycle of disaster management by providing risk information to the right communities at the right time. The United States leads the Disasters Working Group of AmeriGEO and actively participates in the Geohazard Super Sites Natural Laboratories initiative with 2 sites established in the United States. The United States recommends that we also enhance the coordination across all regional GEOs to foster additional collaboration. We continue to work to expand international collaboration through our engagement with other multilateral organizations, as in the case of our participation with the UNGJM Americas and its Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group. This year, the United States also spearheaded an effort through the Open Geospatial Consortium to conduct usability pilots to advance the use of Earth observations for disasters. The pilots address previously identified gaps in stakeholder user needs documented in a 2018 concept development study. We invite our GEO colleagues to join the next phase of the OGC disaster risk reduction pilots in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. So next is China.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to take this opportunity to share some activities conducted by Chinese government in the area of Earth observations for disaster risk reduction. Chinese government has always highly valued space-based disaster risk reduction and regards space technology applications as an important part of national disaster risk governance. At present, the Ministry of Emergency Management of the People's Republic of China, which was established last year, is coordinating and integrating its resources and efforts in satellite communication, navigation, and remote sensing to promote the capacity building for strengthening the disaster risk governance. At the same time, Chinese government actively supports the international cooperations in space-based disaster prevention and reduction. The annual United Nations International Conference on Space-Based Technologies for Disaster Risk Reduction, co-organized by United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs and Ministry of Emergency Management, was successfully held in Beijing on November 11. Since the beginning of this year, satellite-based mapping services has been provided for the emergency responses for cyclone disaster in Mozambique in March and the flood in Laos in September. Additionally, tens of images of Golfin satellite and Fengyun satellites has been contributed for other emergency of other countries through international charter. Disaster risk is a common challenge for all of us. Earth observations integrating it with other innovative technologies will have great potential rules for disaster risk reduction. China is willing to work with the GEOs to further promote the application of the Earth observations for this disaster risk reduction and contribute to build a community with a shared future for mankind. Thank you, dear Minister.
Thank you so much. So next time is Japan, please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lisa Robinson. You are very impressive talk. We really need to convey our Earth observation information to people for their taking action through the interactive conversation based on our deep research on their behavior in a sharp and the sharp way, but not a snazzy and dull way. I'm much impressed with your talk. Of course, it is very important for us to strengthen our Earth observation. For example, the real-time rainfall monitoring by the satellite, and also the identification of the inundation and inundation area depths, and agricultural drought monitor by satellite is very, very important. And the source data should be integrated, and integrated knowledge should be passed to the community. But your point of view that after that is very important. So by taking this opportunity, I would emphasize the importance of the one more function for us. That is the facilitator, like a media, who can develop the trust-based relationship with community, and who can propose the target and also the solution, possible solution for their action, and for making them sense. So make sense is very important. I think this facilitator's function should be strengthened and should be added to our Earth observation function. I really impressed by your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan. Probably later, Lisa-san, please respond to this information. So beforehand, we would like to go to Australia.
Thank you very much, and thank you for some fabulous presentation. Australia believes that the GEO community has a great deal to contribute to disaster risk reduction, and we strongly support the GEO Dharma approach of being driven by local and regional priorities. We note it's critical that the GEO community continues to be responsive in mobilising to respond to such priorities, and that we focus on providing EO products that are of immediate utility to the disaster risk reduction community. We need to address many of the concerns raised about how we drive change and the common mistakes the communities make that Lisa raised in her excellent presentation. We need to be cognizant of those in every way that we engage with communities if we are to really drive change. And we also need to, we need to address issues around insufficient in-country expertise to analyse EO data. We need to make sure that products we produce are ready to be used immediately without a vast degree of analysis and interpretation. Australia would also support stronger links between the Earth observation community and the risk modelling community, noting the importance of probabilistic and risk modelling approaches to disaster risk reduction. We recognise that there are still considerable barriers for countries to be able to access authoritative Earth observation information, particularly on the timeframes that are required for them to be used in response to disasters, and the need to have authoritative data very, very quickly. And with that in mind, I'll just make a final point that Australia will be hosting the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Brisbane in June this year. And these issues and the role of Earth observation in informing all stages of the disaster risk reduction cycle will be an important issue for that event. And we'll look forward to hosting you all here again in early next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Australia. The importance of authoritative data or relevant data is described in the discussion paper also. Thank you so much. So next is Chile, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the keynote speaker for her illuminating presentation. Chile welcomes the discussion paper on action on disaster risk reduction, its focus and recommendations for GEO's engagement in this priority topic in line with the Sendai Framework. And we would also like to recall that November 5th was World Tsunami Awareness Day. I'd like to speak a little bit on Chile's experience on these issues. Due to our geographical and geological characteristics, Chile has a high degree of exposure and vulnerability. We're subject to diverse hazards and events of natural origin. Chile is affected continuously by earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and now more frequently by new levels of drought, fires, weather storms, floods, and landslides. Disaster risk reduction is a national priority, and as such, we are committed to the collaborative global agendas within the Sendai Framework and respective regional fora, including the GEO priority in this respect. The earthquake and tsunami that occurred in Chile in 2010 was a relevant event that marked a turning point in our history of natural disasters. Among the lessons learned, we realized that in order to achieve effective DRR planning, the state has a priority role and responsibility. There is a need for appropriate legislation, modernized and mainstreamed among the community. The plans must be well known and understood by the population, and there is a need for involvement of all relevant agencies and actors at different levels. Also, there is a need for considering the different scenarios that may cause a disaster. We need continuous research, data gathering, systematic scientific analytic work, models and dialogue mechanisms to strengthen knowledge and memory recovery of past events. We need operability and strengthening of technological advances incorporated into the early warning centers. We need strengthening telecommunications and satellite support links, integration with technical agencies through simulation exercises, the creation of regional offices and early warning centers operating 24/7, and the optimization and integration of procedures to evacuate the population through the activation of civil protection systems. Earth observations are key elements to the above. In our experience, we also need a multidimensional approach that recognizes the multi-causal nature of disasters, the engagements of the communities, including the private sector, humanitarian organizations, and civil society. And all of the above should allow the strengthening of well-funded perception of risk to foster a culture of prevention, risk reduction, and resilience. The objectives to be achieved are based on the results of 3 pillars: the importance of DRR planning for community development, how to learn from past disasters to reduce the risk of future disasters, and the development of a methodology that allows evidence of cultural changes in organizations through training in DRR. It is essential to work with the community to understand the risk to which they are subject and the appropriate way to deal with it, as it was presented by our keynote speaker today. To this end, the Chilean government prioritizes 2 aspects: working with the municipalities and training of the emergency community chiefs and community leaders. And together with this, my country has created platforms to involve all stakeholders in the risk management and disaster. Our efforts are nationally focused within the framework of AmeriGEO, but also global. And we will welcome the creation of the GEO Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group to coordinate efforts with the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction and support the different GEO activities in this area. Chile participates in the geohazard supersite of volcanic nature in the GEO GSNL initiative. and appreciates the support given in this activity within GEO. Chile also co-chairs the working group of GEO on disasters with the United States. And in line with the above, Chile is planning to organize in Santiago a regional seminar on DRR at the end of March, beginning of April 2020, including an GEO thematic session within the Space Summit Latin American Remote Sensing Week 2020. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chile. So I'd like to bring back to Japan's comment. So Lisa-san, could you kindly respond?
I think you made the point about early warning systems and how we can ensure that when you provide data that it's used effectively. I think it comes to this cultural shift that Chile was just talking about. In the structure of early warning systems, I think one thing that's overlooked or neglected is that the cultural baseline that populations have in terms of their understanding and their relationship with risk, and that happens to be something that Japan excels at. Japan is a fantastic example. Japan also has NHK, which does a superb job as well. I think in other areas this can be improved in the relationships between the media and the technical experts, not at the point when we need to get the data out, but way before that, the 364 days of the year before something happens. And it needs to be an ongoing effort. And I think that one area that could really improve is that trusted relationship amongst media and professionals as well as government officials, and building those relationships in a way that there is trust and understanding between both sides and how they work together to communicate with the general public.
Thank you, Lisa-san, for your response. So now I would like to encourage you to send interaction tool for using digital Slido. We don't have any comment on Slido. So, okay. So if possible, please send. And any delegations to say some remarks? If not, I would like to ask Tijiyama-san to make intervention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and a good afternoon to all the distinguished delegates and participants in this event. First of all, I express my thanks to GEO for the invitation, and I also compliment GEO on the high relevance of its 2020-2022 work program. Special thanks are also due to the Government of Australia for its very welcoming hospitality and this perfectly organized conference. I represent the United Nations ESCAP, which is one of the UN's 5 regional commissions whose primary mandate is to promote regional cooperation. And so my intervention today will be very much focused on the Asia-Pacific region, so regional perspectives. I will talk about 3 key challenges, and before I get to the 3 key challenges, I would like to give the challenges some context in terms of disasters. And I will give you very, very brief highlights of our key findings from the research we have done over the past 2 years. The research has come together in the form of a publication called The Disaster Riskscape Across Asia Pacific. We have mapped the risk landscape across the region, and we have also tried to find action points that can build pathways for people inclusion and people empowerment and people resilience. Because at the end of the day, from whichever discipline we come, it's all about people and it's all about leaving no one behind. So, sorry, the wrong green one. Okay, here we go. So first of all, in Asia Pacific, the blue dotted line, economic losses as a percentage of GDP are rising rapidly. When we compare it to economic losses across the rest of the world, we see a relatively flat line. So Asia Pacific is the most disaster impacted region of the world, economic losses on a sharp increase. And this is because Asia Pacific faces a new climate reality. And in the current edition of our publication, we included slow onset disasters. And slow onset disasters typically are drought, but could also be many other forms of slow moving, slow creeping disasters. And once this slow onset disaster was included in our model, the annualized economic losses through to 2030 more than quadruple as compared to previous estimates. They reach 675 billion, or around 2.4% of GDP. This is assuming that it's business as usual through to 2030. And among the various disasters, you see that drought accounts for around 60% of disaster losses. Floods, 12.8, tropical cyclones, the same as floods. Tsunamis, relatively small, but the key issue about tsunamis is that even though they are infrequent, when they hit, they are extremely deadly. Then another finding is that the intensification of extreme events goes together with a changing geography. And this changing geography has resulted in 4 transboundary disaster hotspots that also are areas where economic fragility, poverty, and inequality converge in a perfect storm. And then we tried to zoom in a little bit and to see what are the implications. How does this impact people? And to be able to do this, we need to know where the poor are located in these 4 hotspots. And this was very difficult to do because we just don't have the location-based socio-demographic population health data, household survey data. And so we tried to do an overlaying of different types of data sources. We started with the Human Development Index, which is a statistical geospatial data mix. We then overlaid it with a gridded population, land degradation data, and then we determined the hotspots of vulnerable populations with low HDI exposed to land degradation. It was a task that we could do only in sporadic areas. It wasn't a comprehensive, systematic regional analysis. So this is clearly a gap in data, in information, and clearly a gap in how we analyze the link between disasters and poverty and that vicious circle. So this really brings me to 3 key challenges. And the first one is on open open and available, freely open and available data. And we all agree on it, but we agree on it in principle. We have difficulty in the details. And for example, when we think about haze or air pollution, transboundary air pollution, satellite imagery is freely available. It's accessible, it's there. We can see the haze or the air pollution, but when we ask to verify the data that is being generated by the satellite imagery with the on-the-ground observation data, that's where the cross-country data sharing stops. And that is just one example. The second challenge is that data needs to be accessible, and it needs to be universally accessible. And to enable this, as data becomes more and more digitized, we need to get everyone online. Less than half of the population of Asia Pacific uses internet. Even less uses broadband internet. And so key in making data accessible to all is the need to identify everyone, to know the profiles of everyone. And that requires a digital identity. And there are countries, for example, India, that have made tremendous progress in giving everybody a digital identity. And that is really key to implementing policies and programs that ensure that nobody is forgotten or left behind. And thirdly, data needs to be usable. And so for making data usable, there is much that can be done on improving the user-friendly context. Somebody was mentioning that we should provide data that doesn't need too much additional analysis or interpretation. It's popularizing the data. I think it's linking back to some of the things that Lisa was mentioning in her presentation. But it's also a continuous training and enabling that entrepreneurial spirit and dynamism that we see in many of the poorest countries of the region. We see a tremendous dynamism that is beginning to ignite. And we see a tremendous potential for local adaptation of expertise that can be transferred by the more advanced countries of the region. And a second aspect of making data usable is that geospatial data needs to be used across a very broad spectrum of policymakers. And so this is quite a challenge because it requires an understanding of different communities. It requires an understanding of working across disciplines. And we are working on ways of integrating geospatial data into official statistics, because official statistics play a key role in policy prioritization and in development planning. But in addition to that, there are other ministries, and I think finance is one of the important ones. Finance with the budgetary allocations it makes. And then I would say that foreign affairs is a ministry to try to penetrate. Foreign affairs traditionally hasn't worked on geospatial. Foreign affairs, it's trade, it's all these other things, political things. But the way our world is evolving, these are new areas of work and areas where the civil service will need to adapt and to evolve broader policy-making processes. And so, given these three challenges, what are some of the action points? And I don't think I have the solutions, but I think there are actions that can be taken and that can lead to the solutions, perhaps even the definitive solutions. And the first one is partnerships. And ESCAP is all about partnerships. It's about regional cooperation, so partnerships among countries. And I'd like to highlight just very briefly three key programs that we have. One is the regional Plan of Action on Space Applications for Sustainable Development. It's the first member states-driven blueprint on cooperation in the region on space applications. It was divided into 6 thematic areas, which you can see there. They are all interlinked with the indivisibility of the SDGs. And 188 actions were agreed to that countries will implement cooperatively and in partnership with many different players. And as you see from the size of the circle, the largest number of actions to be taken are on disaster risk reduction and resilience, followed by natural resource management. Second is our Regional Space Applications Program, a program that has lasted more than 25 years. And the flagship under this program is a regional drought mechanism, which is very much focused on capacity development. And so bringing the tools, it provides a toolbox that is offered by spacefaring countries, by countries with advanced expertise on geospatial, to the high disaster risk, low capacity countries with local adaptation. And so this program has had extensive support. Then very briefly, then the next one is that we are the secretariat to the UN GGIM Asia Pacific group, and we are supporting the global framework of open data sharing principles. As I mentioned, we all agree on the principles, but through this group and working in partnership with, working with all partners, we would like to develop a regional framework of open data sharing principles. The idea being that when we come down to a lower level of subsidiarity, if you want, then we can add more operational modalities because we're a smaller group. But we do want this regional framework to be anchored to the global framework and just bring it down to a smaller group, but with some perhaps more well-defined operational implementation modalities. And then this framework will then be supported by a networked regional data hub under UN GGIM. And we are working in close collaboration with GEO, because we understand that a data hub is under development by GEO. So we're looking to see how we can have one platform. There are many different platforms at the moment, and we'd like to see how all of this can come under one approach. And we're also in close consultation with Geodharma, and we're also hoping that Geodharma could eventually join the GGIM group as a member. ESCAP Secretariat took over the Secretariat services for GGIM a year ago, so we've just started, but we are reaching out to as many partners as we can. And then finally, on the digital connectivity. Giving everyone a digital identity means we need to have universal internet access, and we are implementing the Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway initiative across the whole region. We are implementing it through 4 pillars, the idea being to bring affordable, reliable, secure broadband to all, for all. Thank you very much.
Tiziana-san, thank you very much for very interesting interventions. I'm from Asia Pacific region, and I learned that about 2/3 of the world population is in Asia Pacific region. So I'm very impressed with your intervention. Thank you very much. So still we have time, and Stephen-san introduced me to ask intervention from GEO participating organization, COICA. Do you have any interventions?
This will be a real-time translation. From Spanish to English.
I see.
Soy Shaquem, vengo de la Amazonía, de la Cuenca, para dejar un mensaje a misma organización que representa a 9 países sudamericanas, que comprenden 511 pueblos y miles de comunidades, que corresponde el 20% del mundo.
I am Shakaim, protector of the Amazon. I am representing COICA, an umbrella organization of indigenous organizations of the Amazon Basin, working in South American countries with more than 511 communities and villages, corresponding to 20% of the global territory.
Trabajo en el proyecto denominado TOA, que quiere decir Todos los Ojos en la Amazonía, misma que está enmarcado al trabajo de monitoreo ambiental por los impactos causados por la empresa minera, petrolera, maderera.
I work on the project All Eyes on the Amazon in Ecuador and Peru that is working on environmental monitoring projects in relation to the impacts caused by the mining, oil, and logging industry.
Nuestros pueblos amazónicos aún están no contactados con el mundo globalizado, porque no tenemos acceso al Internet. Es nuestra gran preocupación. Sin Internet no podemos acceder a los datos satelitales. Por lo tanto, invito en esta sala a una gran minga para superar este reto hasta el 2030.
Our people in the Amazon are still not connected with the globalized world as we don't have access to the internet. This is a great worry for us, as without the internet we can't access satellite images. So I invite everybody here to try to work together to try to overcome this challenge.
Muchas gracias. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your kind intervention from COICA, situation of the Amazon area. Thank you so much. So I will ask some questions to distinguished guest speakers, two of Lisa-san and Tiziana-san. Do you have any questions or? Okay, Japan, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tiziana Bonapes. Your point is for sound decision making, we need to integrate geospatial data and official statistics. This is very important, and also strengthen the partnership, the national and maybe regional partnership. Yes, for example, I heard the $109 billion is needed for flood control and irrigation against the drought disaster in Asia by 2030. So for developing the quality infrastructure, we need high level integrated science-based information. The Global Earth Observation System of Systems and its partner data integration systems, including the Data Integration Analysis System, DIAS, by Japan, can provide us with the integrated information by combining Earth observation data and socio-economic information, including the official statistics and human behaviors. So such kind of the, integrated data could be used for sound decision making. In addition, in Asia, in collaboration with several countries, including Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, we established a platform on water resilience and disaster by inviting related the ministry, department, and authorities and the universities. And by using such a data integration system, we encourage our collaboration beyond the discipline and agencies. So, and that is each country activity. And under the Asian Oceania GEO, we have a regional coordination mechanism, that is Asian Water Cycle Initiative, that is a regional, through the regional coordination and discussion, we can share our experiences, knowledge, and ideas. So in such a way, we can work together. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So, Kizano-san, please.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you to both the representative from KOICA and from Japan. From KOICA, I couldn't agree more with you. The digital divide in Asia Pacific is widening, unfortunately, and a widening digital divide translates into every single other development divide, because digital technology is an enabler and accelerator of everything that we do. So we say, you know, everything happens somewhere, and more everything happens somewhere through digital connectivity. And in Asia Pacific, we see that the digital divide is the result of advanced countries that have taken off, and they have taken off in particular over the last few years in terms of big data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all these new trends. And then we see the middle to high income countries beginning to accelerate and beginning to try to converge. But then there's a group of countries where there has been stagnation for the past 2 decades. And it's that group of countries that is a key concern for us, because we have this pledge that we will leave no one behind. And yet we know that up to now, less than half of the population in the region has access to broadband. So there is really a need for a big push on ICT infrastructure. And if that big push on investments in resilient ICT infrastructure, because ICT infrastructure is one of the most vulnerable during earthquakes, flooding, and other disasters. So if there is such a push, if this can be achieved, then the potential of geospatial data and information to truly make a difference and to truly transform the development process, I think can be realized. Because data information needs to lead to action, and it's action by many different actors. and more it's through the internet. The representative from Japan, thank you very much for your offers of partnership. We welcome them. We're going to be following up. We're going to actually continue the conversation. I think tremendous work has been done, and tremendous progress has been done. I would actually not want to leave a negative message, or dull. I think that's what Lisa was saying, a dull message. I was a little bit showing the bad news because I had to talk about challenges. But there is tremendous good work, tremendous progress. When typhoons hit, I think the big one in India that struck India and Bangladesh in November, was it November? Yeah, a few months ago, super typhoon, and millions of people evacuated. The death toll was in single numbers, and that was all through early warning, through preparedness, and through a very orderly evacuation process at the right time, not too early, not too late. And this has all been made possible through the geospatial and combination with ground data, the big data analytics. But it's not enough. We have to go further, and we have to really ask ourselves, with all of this progress made on early warning, and being able to predict and prepare, how come the economic losses are rising so rapidly? And part of the answer, I think, is in the observation made by the representative from Japan. Much more investments need to be made ex ante before the disasters in resilient infrastructure. The past is no longer a good predictor of the future. We have to invest for a different future, a very complex dynamic of climate change and disaster-related events. Thank you.
Tiziana-san, thank you very much for your reply. So we are now at the final stage of this session, and thank you very much for your sending remarks or questions through the Slido as I facilitated before. But because of my bad facilitation, time is almost end. And I would like to show some slide summary. Stevenson kindly wrap up. One is we should think about how to share DRR experiences in GEO. Second is consider if the International Disaster Charter could support disaster preparedness. And third, final, is we should also consider GEO role in early warnings. This is several slides wrap up. And now GEO Secretariat is making the summary of today's session, but probably this summary would be presented. Oh, I see. Okay. Yes, this is a summary of today's discussion. Probably tomorrow morning, co-chair will show these outcomes at the meeting. So this is the end of the session 3. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation, and I would like to again thanks to Lisa-san and Tiziana-san for your great and interest and very impressive presentation and interventions. So thank you very much.
And also thank you to Chihara-san as well for moderating for us.
Thank you so much.
So we have two announcements at the moment. The first one is for the gala dinner. If you do not collect your tickets by the end of this break, you forfeit the chance to go to the dinner. You must collect your tickets. Is that clear? I know I've got a funny accent, but can you all understand me? Okay. The second point is my boss, the main man, Gilberto, will be
making an announcement now upstairs with Google. In about 5 minutes, there will be a big announcement coming out from GEO and Google. So if you'd like to be part of that announcement, please go upstairs. That will be made in 5 minutes. Otherwise, we would like to see you back in here for session 4, which we will begin again sharply at 4 p.m. Have a good break. Thank you.